Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's episode. I would just like to state that I'm very grateful for those people that are regular listeners and were patient with me last week. I don't want to come up with excuses, but I feel like I just didn't get it done, is the truth. I'd love to say that I was super busy or something, and I mean I was, but it's not any busier than I normally have been. I just didn't get it done. So that's awkward on my part, but that's okay because we're back this week. So I took a week hiatus, took a little break on accident, wasn't on purpose, wasn't planned, but I appreciate those who stuck with me and are back for this week. So today's episode is about teenage boys. And you might be like, wow, that's really weird, Kyra. Why are you talking about teenage boys? That's kind of not in your element. So, who makes you the authority? And that's fair. Totally fair. 100%. But I did read a book by Michael Thompson with a PhD and Dan Kindlin with a PhD. And they are, actually, I'll just read the little thing. So, Michael Thompson, PhD, is a preeminent child psychologist who lectures widely on topics pertaining to the development of boys and also conducts problem-solving workshops with parents, teachers, and students around the country. A highly sought-after consultant to schools, Dr. Thompson is currently the staff psychologist of an all-boys independent school in the Boston area. And then it doesn't give information on Dan Kindland for some reason. I'm sure I could look it up, but I'm not going to. Anyway, I'm just going to read the blurb to you because it's pretty fascinating. So this book's called Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys. And then here's the blurb. In Raising Cain, Dan Kindlin, PhD, and Michael Thompson, PhD, two of the country's leading child psychologists, share what they've learned in more than 35 years of combined experience working with boys and their families. They reveal a nation of boys who are hurting, sad, afraid, angry, and silent. Statistics point to an alarming number of young boys at high risk for suicide, alcohol and drug abuse, violence, and loneliness. Kindlin and Thompson set out to answer this basic, crucial question. What do boys need that they're not getting? They illuminate the forces that threaten our boys, teaching them to believe that cool equals macho strength and stoicism. Cutting through outdated theories of mother blame, boy biology, and testosterone, Kindlin and Thompson shed light on the destructive, emotional training our boys receive, the emotional miseducation of boys. Through moving case studies and cutting-edge research, Raising Cain paints a portrait of boys systematically steered away from their emotional lives by adults and the peer culture of cruelty. Boys who receive little encouragement to develop qualities such as compassion, sensitivity, and warmth. The good news is that this doesn't have to happen. There is much we can do to prevent it. Kindlin and Thompson make a compelling case that emotional literacy is the most valuable gift we can offer our sons, urging parents to recognize the price boys pay when we hold them to an impossible standard of manhood. They identify the social and emotional challenges that boys encounter in school and show how parents can help boys cultivate emotional awareness and empathy, giving them the vital connections and support they need to navigate the social pressures of youth. Powerfully written and deeply felt, Raising Cain will forever change the way we see our sons and will transform the way we help them to become happy and fulfilled young men. So I read this for one of my classes, my emotional and relational development through the lifespan course. I've actually really enjoyed reading the different books. The course is frustrating me a little bit just for lots of different reasons. I wrote a little journal entry about how frustrated I was, and then I felt better. Then I went back to feeling frustrated just about the class. But anyway, I've loved reading the books. We've read Raising Cain or Reviving Ophelia, you gotta pick. Love Sense by Dr. Sue Johnson. The Science of Trust, Emotional Attunement for Couples by John M. Gottman. We didn't read the whole book of The Science of Trust. We just read multiple chapters, but we did read a significant portion of the book, so I counted as read. And then Love Sense, like I said, boy, I loved that book. It's so good. And then now we're working on The Body Keeps the Score and reading a lot per week. But that's okay because I'm going to read it, and I'm going to be done, and it's going to be great. I have really enjoyed that book as well. Back to Raising Cain. So I took a lot of notes and sent a lot of quotes to different friends and family about what I was reading from this book about Raising Cain. And I actually just learned so much. And I'll be honest with you, my fascination with teenage boys and how they act and their behaviors really started and really developed when I was an FSY counselor, because obviously I'm dealing with a lot of young men, a lot of teenage boys, and I've never been a young man, but I'm around a lot of them. And so I was curious as to how to help them best. And I was curious as to how to help them feel loved and help them feel seen and heard, but then not be too in their face or too emotional or anything that would make them uncomfortable. I just kind of followed the spirit, did my best. I tried to just treat them like a little brother, someone who I cared about, someone who I teased, someone who I shared insight with, someone who I loved as much as I possibly could. And most of the time, that worked out pretty well. Or it took some time and then it worked out. I think it was just hard because some of them viewed and they perceived that being an FSY counselor was just a job to me. And that's fair. That's okay. I mean, I understand that. I think that took away some of their, ability to feel loved because they were fighting it. And that's unfortunate. But I would say that at the end of the week, most of them, hopefully, knew that I at least cared about them. And that Heavenly Father cared about them too. I think another thing that kind of opened my eyes to hurting youth and youth that just need love when they're being difficult or when they are super loud or, don't listen very well or whatever, that really they just are in need of love. And I've told this story before and I've written it on a blog post, so you can find it on, I think it's More. Yeah, it's More. So if you want to go read that blog post, I would recommend you to. I will leave a link in the description so that you can go read it if you would like. But I'm going to tell you the story, so you might not need to read it since I'm just going to tell you it. I am not going to tell the story perfect, and I'm not going to tell the story exactly the way that I heard it because that's kind of hard to do. But I'm going to tell the story the way that I remembered it, the way that stuck out to me, and the way that mattered to me. So, basically the story was this guy came in and he was telling us about his dog, about how he loved his dog and how he loved to go hunting with her, he loved to spend time with her. She was a super happy, go-lucky, vibrant dog. And he explained that he didn't have any sons, and that was kind of hard. But when his daughter got married, he was super excited to have a son-in-law and to go hunting. So he and his son-in-law go hunting, and they bring his dog. And they're going out, they're, walking through the woods when they get to this area with a lake, and they shoot a duck. And the duck falls and lands on the floor, and the dog just stands there. And normally the dog would go up, and I don't actually know the dog's name. He didn't tell us, but maybe he did, and I forgot. But let's just name her Lucy just for fun, okay? So Lucy just stood there. And she didn't move. And normally she would run and go get the duck and come back wagging her tail and super excited, but she just stood there. And he was like, Lucy, what are you doing? Go. And she just stood there. And he kind of gave her a nudge with his leg, and she just stood there. Eventually she went and then retrieved the duck, and she came back. And he was really confused because this was not her normal behavior. This was not what she normally did. But he just didn't think much of it and just thought maybe she's just having a bad day. They end up shooting another duck. This time the son-in-law shoots another duck. And I guess it's not a duck. I don't know. It's like a bird. The bird falls into the lake. And normally, like I said, Lucy would jump in and go get it. But she just stood there and she didn't move. And he was like, what is going on? And he's like, Lucy, go get the duck or go get the bird. And she just stood there. And he's like, what is she doing? The son-in-law says to him, hey, I love hunting and all, but I can't keep shooting birds that your dog's not going to go get. I don't feel good inside about it. And he's like, okay, fair enough. Let's head back. So they head back and they're walking to the truck, and they get to the truck, and his son-in-law gets in the truck, and he needs to put Lucy in his bed of his truck. And he tells her to hop up there, and she just stands there. And he is like, seriously, I've had it. Why is she just standing there? This is not like her. Getting kind of frustrated and flustered and feeling overwhelmed. And eventually he picks her up and he tosses her in the bed truck. And he looks down, and on his hands there's blood. And he realizes that Lucy was not being difficult. Lucy was not an idiot. Lucy was injured. She was injured. She was not an idiot. She was injured. And he realized that she was not okay and that she was very injured and she needed help. And so they went and got help, and she ended up being okay and then back to her go-lucky, happy self when she was feeling better. And he related this to the youth. And he said, as FSY counselors, you're going to meet a lot of youth this summer. A lot. And some of them are going to fight you. Some of them are going to be loud. Some of them are going to be rambunctious. By the way, I'm just saying what I remembered. This is probably not what he said at all, and I'm just adding it into there. I just remember he said that some of the youth are hurting and they're going to be injured. So I'm just adding all this stuff, just so you know. So from the mouth of Kyra, some of the youth are going to be injured and they're going to be hurt. And they're going to come from broken families. Yeah, he didn't say this. I'm saying this. Okay. And they're going to come from broken families, and they're going to come going through something really, really hard. And they're going to come facing mental health challenges. And they're going to come not getting much attention from their family or from their schoolmates or friends. And they're going to be injured. And some of these injured youth are going to act like idiots. And some of these injured youth are going to be difficult. They're going to be sassy. They're going to be defiant. They might be disrespectful. And they might be kind of hard to be around and to deal with. But I want you to remember that these youth are not idiots. They are injured. And that really stuck out to me. I mean, it was like this whole paradigm shift in my head of, wow, it spoke to me, honestly. And the truth is that it made sense. I mean, I'm sure I would have kind of approached it that way anyway, just because I'm interested in psychology and interested in people who are hurting. And so I love that story because it was such a great metaphor for why the youth may act a certain way. They may just be injured. And so then as I was reading this book, Raising Cain, so many things stuck out to me and they spoke to me just like before. And they just seemed to align with a lot of the things that I noticed and things that I've observed just from being an FSY counselor the last 2 years and then having 2 younger brothers. And so I'm just going to read some of the quotes that I saved, and I'm going to just talk about them. And I'd like to state that I am not the expert. I am not the person with all the authority here. I don't have clinical experience working with young men. I have worked with young men in FSY, but I haven't worked with them within a therapy setting or within a clinical setting, and so it's just a little bit different. But these 2 men have over a long time, over many years, and I feel like they're qualified. And so they talk about research, and then they also talk about lots and lots of personal examples of young men that they talk to or boys that they talk to, and kind of gave an example of whatever topic or concept they were teaching. So I didn't organize these quotes in the order that they came up in, and so I'm just going to say them and read them in the order that I have them in, but once again, not in the order that they are found in the book. First quote is, "Most boys, despite feelings of anger and pain, are quieter students of emotional suffering. They long for love, acceptance, and approval from their parents and peers. They struggle for self-respect. They act impulsively, moved by emotions they cannot name and do not understand." That's the end of the quote. And I love this because I feel like that is so accurate for some of the young men I met. Quiet students of emotional suffering. And I did my very best. In fact, I have many times in my head that I can think of many stories where I could see this in their faces and I could see it in their countenances. Most times I could see that day one. I could see that when I just first met them, and that's when the prayers would start. The next quote is, quote, "A boy's most common response to controlling behavior is not to be controlled, to become confrontational or defiant." End of quote. And I feel like that's the case too with trying to control the boys or tell them what to do, that sometimes they just become confrontational. And so it was best to kind of approach it in a different way. Here's another quote, and I feel like this was also true. Quote, "Boys who have trouble managing their own emotions may routinely tune out the cues of other people's upset." End of quote. I feel like this one kind of explains itself. Most of them explain themselves, but I just kind of wanted to add my own little thoughts and insight about each one. But I feel like this can be definitely true. If people are unsure of their own emotions, they don't kind of know what they're feeling, they don't know how to name it, they don't know how to tame it, they don't really know what's going on with how they're feeling, then they'll have a harder time picking up on other people's emotional cues. And I feel like this was true with the young men that I talked to sometimes when they were talking to me and kind of saying some not nice things, that they were not picking up on my cues, that it was, upsetting me. But like I said, I feel like I did a pretty good job of treating these boys like they were injured, and not in the way that this is making it me sound, but I mean treating them just with love and with respect rather than treating them like an idiot. When they did this, when they were mean or rude, I didn't hate them. Like, I cannot think of a youth this whole summer that I hated, ever. Not one. Ever. Not even a little bit, honestly. I can't even think of, youth that I really disliked. I just can't. I'm not just saying that. I just can't think of anyone. But even the youth that were a little bit more confrontational, a little bit more defiant, I just remembered that they were hurt and they were injured. Okay, the next quote is, quote, "All boys have feelings. They're often treated as if they don't. They often act as if they don't. But all boys are born with the potential for a full range of emotional experience." End of quote. I love that. All boys are born with the potential for a full range of emotional experience. Boys are not any less likely to have emotions. They just are treated often as if they don't. And so then they act like they don't, because that would match up with what they're treated like. And that just is how they kind of cope with it. This is the next quote. Quote, "When they can't hold the pain any longer, they act on it. At any age, boys cut off from meaningful relationships miss critical opportunities for emotional growth." So I'll be honest with you, and something that's been really devastating to me is that some of my youth this summer have just kind of cut off contact. They've dropped off the face of the earth. They've left the group chats. They've stopped, responding, and it just breaks my heart. It really does, because I connect with these youth, and I recognize that I was only with them a week. That's fair. I respect that. But also, I feel like that doesn't mean anything. Just because it was a week doesn't mean that I feel like I don't know them and miss them. I feel like when these boys, specifically the boys, sometimes the girls cut off, but it's more likely that the boys kind of dip, that when they cut off from these meaningful relationships, they're missing these critical opportunities for emotional growth. And it makes me feel a little bit less bad that this is their choice, this is their agency, and maybe it's just hard to maintain a relationship over technology. It's harder when it's through the screen and not in person. This next quote is, quote, "Kids pick up on how you feel about them as human beings. If they feel respected, if they feel liked and cared for, those boys are a piece of cake. These cold, angry boys melt in your hand because their basic needs are to be loved, cared for, respected. Boys have the same human needs as the girls." End of quote. I love this quote. I love this quote so much. If they feel respected, if they feel liked and cared for, these cold, angry boys melt in your hand because their basic needs are to be loved, cared for, and respected. I love this quote so much, and I feel like this is so accurate and so true. I mean, yes. Just yes. I just agree with that 100%. Okay, the next quote is, quote, "Almost all boys hide their hurt because to admit it appears weak, and they all look to make preemptive strikes when possible, to divert attention from themselves and onto others." End of quote. I like that one too. Not as much as others, but I feel like it's pretty good too. Here's the next quote. Quote, emotional isolation wears many faces. Sometimes it comes in the disguise of anger, sarcasm, or hostility. Boys who see almost everyone and everything as unworthy of respect when really it's they who feel worthless. Feeling vulnerable because of parental criticism or unreasonable expectations, or because they feel the power of their peers to humiliate them, these boys don't slip off quietly, but instead adopt a confrontational, I could care less attitude. These boys can be the most difficult to reach. Their behavior is so off-putting that they don't win much sympathy. End of quote. I'm just at a loss for words as I read these quotes. I'm just reminded of how many times I just thought of specific young men and specific youth I met this summer and just said, yep, yep, that matches. Yep, that matches. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That just went through my head all the time. And this book was actually a little bit hard to read because it really, really made me miss my FSY youth. And it really made me miss my FSY young men. And so I just feel like this is so true. When it comes in the guise of anger, sarcasm, or hostility, when they see everyone as unworthy of respect, it's really they who feel worthless. And I feel like that is how I tried to treat these young men, as if they needed to be shown that they were worth something and that they had value. This one's not really about teenage boys, but I just loved it and wanted to write it down. Quote, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to get over clinical depression without help. End of quote. I just love this one because I am prone to talking about depression and mental health simply because it's important to me. And I love that he found research and simple and actual real life studies that showed that it's almost impossible to get over clinical depression without help. So I love that. Another thing that this book talked about was touch, and how touch is super needed and super important. And that is one of the reasons that I loved being an FSY counselor, because it wasn't weird to give your youth hugs, at least at the end of the week. And it wasn't weird to tell them that you loved them. And it wasn't weird to give them a pat on the back or, a pat on their shoulder. And I miss that constant contact just because it made me feel good and made me feel loved, even though I was often the one reaching out. So what this says is, I took it out of context, which is unfortunate because I don't know how to find it. But the quote is, ... or touched by a friendly hand on the shoulder when in grief. All kinds of touch result in the release of these natural pain-killing opiates. End of quote. It ended up talking about how when little kids scrape their knee and they run to their mom for a kiss and a hug, they are actually getting a painkiller through that touch and that love and that care and attention, because their body's releasing those chemicals that will help ease that pain. And I think that's so cool. And then in another book, Love Sense, it also talked about touch and how important it was, and how touch can be a healer, a physical healer, an emotional and physical healer. Overall, I just wanted to state that I love, with absolutely all my heart, the youth. I love them. I love them so much. It almost hurts. And for some, it does hurt because I miss them so much. And I especially miss those young men that gave me a hard time, those young men that were disrespectful at first, those young men that were a little bit confrontational. I miss those young men that were immediately kind and sweet to me. I miss the young men that immediately opened the door. I miss the young men that were excited to see me. I miss the young men that said rude things to me. And I miss the young men that didn't really even say much to me at all. I hope with my heart and soul that I am asked to be an FSY counselor again and hired again, because I crave and I miss those moments, those very tender and those very sacred moments where you get to connect with someone who often doesn't connect, who often doesn't show vulnerability, who often doesn't cry, who often doesn't express emotion. I love those moments when I get to hug them and I get to tell them I love them. I've wrote in a blog post before, and I've read it in one of these more recent episodes, about hugging a young man and how that was one of the most sacred things I've ever experienced while he cries. Hugging a young man while he cries. And not because he was sad, but because he felt loved, seen, cared for, respected. I have maybe one memory of that 2 years ago when I did FSY in 2022. But this year, I think I have like 4 or 5 different memories of specific young men. And I will always and forever cherish those moments, cherish those very sacred experiences where I got to hug a young man and tell him that I loved him. And what makes it so sad is that I feel like these young men that I got to know became my honorary little brothers and became my friends, and I miss them. I would like to state that although I specifically talked about young men today, that doesn't mean that I don't care about the young men. I love them and I miss them and I care for them more than words can express. I just also did an episode about young men because I read a book about young men. And I have not read the Reviving Ophelia book. So we got to pick which one we were going to read. And so half the class did one, half the class did the other one. And so I didn't read the other one, like I said, because I am a girl, and I experienced the teenage life. So I was like, Anyway, that's not important. I just would like to state that I do miss my young women, and I do love teenage girls. I love the youth in general. I really do. I hope through this episode you were able to learn just a little bit more about young men, a little bit more about boys and teenage boys, and maybe why they're confrontational, maybe why they're disrespectful, maybe why they're defiant, maybe why they don't say much, maybe why they kind of aren't seen. And I hope that you are able to recognize that they need love and attention and care as much as the girls do, if not maybe a little bit more, simply because they don't receive it very often in the first place, and sometimes girls do. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to talk about this, and I'm actually grateful that I read that book, even though this class is driving me crazy. I really hope you enjoyed it, and just so you know, if you've gotten to this point, I just barely renewed my podcast for another year. So, I'm going to turn this cheering thing on, just so you know. Be ready for it. Heck yeah. So anyway, I'm excited for that. I hope you guys have a great day. Don't forget to embrace imperfection, find meaning, satisfaction, and joy from the journey. I'm Kyra, and this is Imperfectly Broken, the podcast.